One of the most important areas of succeeding in property investing is finding the right area. Now, when you're looking at the cash flow strategy where you have sufficient rent to cover your monthly expenses, the areas that don't work are your more affluent, higher income suburban areas. The areas where your cash flow tends to work are more in your lower income / inner city type environments. Now, when you are looking for the right investment area, you have to consider whether the yield is strong enough, so i.e. is there enough rent to cover the monthly expenses? And the second, and probably the most important element, is the risk that you're investing in. A couple of weeks ago on the September of 2021, I had a guest speaker on my webinar by the name of Michelle Dickens. She is the founder and CEO of TPN. And during this webinar, she shared with us the top performing suburbs of 2021. In this short educational, I will be taking you through a specific province's performance and which are the highest rated suburbs in that province. Let's have a look at Western Cape as a province and what the top performing suburbs are in this region. Before we get into the specific suburbs, we can look at an overall look at the market in the Western Cape. So on the screen, you're seeing essentially the vacancy rate, which is symboled in grey, the gross yield symboled in blue, and the good standing ratio symboled in green. Right off the bat, what I can notice, especially having just recently recorded the Gauteng version, is that the Western Cape's gross yield, which is essentially an indicator of whether a deal or an investment area will yield positive cash flow deals, is low. You know, you're looking at 8.6 in the Western Cape, 6.3 in the Atlantic Seaboard. You know, you get a property there, the rent's not even going to cover the bond. That's basically what that statistic is saying. The southern suburbs, the winelands, sitting below 7%. The only potential area where, you know, cash flow would potentially work is in the northern suburbs with a gross yield of 9.1. But comparing that to, you know, what we've just looked at in terms of the Gauteng numbers, Western Cape definitely doesn't have the yields that we're looking at there. What I can say, which is good about Western Cape, is that the good standing ratio is definitely higher than other provinces. You know, the southern suburbs, you're looking at a 90% good standing ratio, which means 9 out of 10 tenants pay their rent on time, and a low vacancy rate of only 5.8 empty properties. And, you know, this is data from the end of 2021 when COVID is still a factor, and COVID has definitely impacted the property market. So to have such a low vacancy rate, you know, and I think it stems to the reasoning why a lot of people like Western Cape as an investment area is it's safe, it's got good capital appreciation, it's got a good tenant demographic, your payment behavior of the tenants in this area are very good. And that is again reflected with a very high, you know, above 80% for all the different regions in terms of a good standing ratio. So from a you know, high level summary point of view, Western Cape probably doesn't make sense from a rental perspective because the yields are not high enough, but it's a safe investment because your capital should appreciate and your tenants are good payers. When we look at the top performing suburbs, we're looking here at essentially 6 neighborhoods. We're looking at the Atlantic Seaboard, Helderberg, Northern Suburbs, South Peninsula, Southern Suburbs, West Coast, and Western Seaboard as various areas where this data has been collected. So let's start here on the left with Atlantic Seaboard. Obviously, the blue represents capital growth, the blue bar. So you can see in the Atlantic Seaboard, they're expecting, you know, 12%, 10 to 12% capital appreciation. Now that's pretty common. The Atlantic Seaboard are your areas like, you know, Camps Bay and Clifton and Bantry Bay, you know, all of these very, very luxurious and hyperly expensive properties. So it's not surprising to me to see quite a strong capital appreciation estimate. Funny enough, the effective yield or the gross yield, which is an indicator whether there will be enough rent to cover the expenses, is sitting quite high in Fresnay. So if we look at Atlantic Seaboard as a general area, you know, your Bantry Bays, your Cliftons, etc., you're probably never going to find a deal where the rent makes enough sense. But in one suburb within the Atlantic Seaboard region, known as Fresnay, actually does have quite a decent yield based on the data that we're seeing. So we see roughly a gross yield of about 17.5%, minimal delinquent behavior. So if Atlantic Seaboard is something that you're interested in, from a rental perspective, the only real suburb that I would recommend is Fresnay, just because the yield does seem to be strong enough to potentially have some positive cash flow. We move over to Heidelberg. I have no idea where that is, to be honest. But luckily I don't need to know because the data is telling me the story. So we've got in Heidelberg 2 suburbs that have been performing well. So Laurie's Pass and then Golden Land. So again, decent high capital appreciation, 7-8% maybe for Sir Laurie and about 6% for Golden Land. Again, if I compare that to the Gauteng report, which I just recently looked at, your capital appreciation rate in the Western Cape suburbs is a lot higher. That being said, the yields are a lot lower. And as Michelle mentioned in the webinar that we hosted recently regarding the top performing suburbs, that there's an inverse relationship with yield and capital appreciation. That if your capital appreciation is high in an area, your yield tends to suffer. So it's almost like got an inverse relationship. Golden Land, similar to Sir Laurie, but a slightly higher delinquency rate. If you are interested in the Heidelberg area, I would say Sir Laurie is a good place to start. Seems to have a yield of about 18-19%. You should find a few positive cash flow deals. Moving on to the northern suburbs, we've got a couple of areas here that seem to be performing pretty well. The first one being Bosonia, Klipkop, Parow Valley, Tigerhof, Parow, Kraaifontein, and Lukaramant. I don't know what that one is. Of these areas that I've looked at, Parow as an area, I've definitely seen a couple of cash flow positive deals there, and Kraaifontein, I've also seen I've seen 2 deals there that did make positive cash flow sense. So yeah, we're seeing here an average yield of between the 15 and 20% in the northern suburbs for these top performing areas. If you go to the likes of Durbanville or some of the other areas, you won't find any yields. So these seem to be the limited number that do actually have some sort of potential positive cash flow. Your Parow, as you can see, both the Parow Valley and the Parow SP have got relatively high delinquency rates. And I say relative because I mean relative to the Cape Town market. If you look at this image as a whole, you can see there's very little or very low red bars in comparison to the likes of a KZN or a Gauteng. So the trend that I'm hoping that you pick up from this is that Cape Town's going to have lots of blues or high capital growth. It's going to have medium to low greens or effective yields, and it's going to have low reds or delinquent yields, delinquent behaviors. So again, that's telling me that if you're looking for a more secure, safer investment, you're not that interested in the positive cash flow, then Cape Town or Western Cape is probably the area you want to look at. From these northern suburbs, I'd obviously go for Bosonia and Klipkop. Good capital appreciation, good yields, low delinquencies. Those would be my first 2 areas that I'd be investigating. In the South Peninsula, there's only one that's come out as a good performer, and that's Marina da Gama. Never heard of that, but a good capital appreciation rate of 7.5, low delinquency rate. You can start seeing that there's a trend here in the Cape Town market or the Western Cape that it's good blues, average greens, low reds. Southern suburbs, so Grassy Park, that's definitely an area that I tell my students who are interested in the Western Cape market to go and have a look at. It's got a bit of the low income vibe. It's got some of the gross yields that are attractive for positive cash flow. As you can see, it's hovering there around 20, 22, 23%. So it's definitely the highest performing gross yield that we've seen in the Western Cape so far. Obviously, you'll see in the West Coast that there's another high performer. But that is more the kind of numbers that I expect to see in Joburg. So when you see a gross yield of 20% plus, you definitely know you're in the area or the right area where positive cash flow deals are to be found. The other 4 suburbs the other 4 regions within the southern suburbs, being Southfield, Wetton, Observatory, and Wynberg, all have the possibility of positive cash flow. I actually recently got an email from a follower on YouTube who asked me to analyze a deal in Wynberg. And the cash flow on that one on day one purchase would be about 1,500, 300,000 rand purchase. So very similar market to that, the typical Berea style market that I often recommend. So I also think Observatory is a great market for student accommodation. I've just recently bought a property there for a few students. So I think if you're looking at the student accommodation market, your OBS, your Rosebank, your Woodstock, Stellenbosch, if you find the right deal, you could put enough students in there, you're definitely gonna find some positive cash flow attraction. Then we move on to the West Coast. So, I don't know this market at all, Mykonos, but it seems to be almost too good to be true. 18% capital appreciation with above 25% gross yield with minimal delinquencies. I assume that this is one of those small towns that became really popular because of COVID. Because a lot of people from inland decided to go and work remotely from the coast. That's the only rationale that I can give as to why that is such a popular and exciting area to look at. If we end off just here with the Western Seaboard, we've got areas like Parklands, Sunridge and Rosendale. So I do have a new build in Parklands. Parklands is an interesting area because it's partly low income, partly new build. And that's, I think, what attracted me to buying a new build there is because I could see the potential of the low income market where the cash flow is, but I also saw a lot of developments happening around in the area, and I thought that could potentially push the value of this property up. So, 9 as basically a 10% capital appreciation rate, which is fantastic. 20% yield, which is good. Minimal delinquency rate. Parklands is a great place to start. What I can say is that new build that I bought into is negative cash flow. Almost always going to be negative cash flow when you buy a new build. But, the potential's there. Sunridge and then Rosendale, Tableview, also both very good performing suburbs. So that's a brief look at the Cape Town or the Western Cape market. In summary, I think if you're looking for the capital appreciation strategy, Western Cape is by far the best performer in that region. Your delinquency rates, your tenants' payment behavior is really good. You're not going to struggle to get your tenants to pay. So, it comes back to, again, what kind of investor you are, what kind of risk appetite you have, what kind of interest you have. Are you interested in the flipping strategy? Are you interested in developments? Are you interested in multi-lets or the cash flow buy-to-let strategy? And based on your strategy, you can then choose the area that you want or the province that you think would meet your requirement, and then you can go through each of these investment grade suburbs and find the one that meets your appetite. Don't forget to subscribe, click the notification button so that every time a new video comes up you are advised or you are notified. Also, please send this to friends, family, anybody that you know that might be interested in the property game, and until next time, happy investing.